Right, your answer. F-16 fighters flying at supersonic speeds of 2,400 kilometers per hour were spotted in the sky in Ukraine. These Steelhawks came to protect Ukrainian skies from Russian aggression. According to experts, these were training flights with Ukrainian aircraft, which revealed the enormous advantage of the F-16. But what will happen during real combat operations? What characteristics of a fighter jet will be a key factor in winning an air battle? And how will this affect the overall situation in Ukraine and the world? F-16s have become a symbol of unwavering spirit and desire for freedom. But to better understand what this fighter is capable of in Ukraine, let's take a look back in history and find out its significance in past military operations.
The F-16 Fighting Falcon is a lightweight multi-role fighter that is highly maneuverable in air-to-air combat and air-to-ground attack.
The official name of this magnificent aircraft is the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon. And just imagine, this plane first flew in 1974. Then, as now, it inspires fear in the enemy by its mere appearance. The F-16 was designed, oddly enough, to gain air superiority, but it also performs well as an attack aircraft, providing support to ground troops, which is very important in Ukraine. An example of power in conflicts is the Operation Peace for Galilee in 1982. At the time, the Israeli Air Force used F-16s to strike Syrian positions and infrastructure, completely disarming the enemy and literally bringing it to its knees, even with a huge number of air defenses. The arrival of the Fighting Falcon in Ukraine was an important event in the ongoing war, and it was only possible thanks to international support. How does this plane affect the course of the battle? Its presence in the Ukrainian skies firstly strengthens the defense capabilities of the country, and secondly shows its readiness to defend its territory, forcing the enemy to react. For example, Russian pilots are now afraid to approach the borders of Ukraine because they realize that the F-16 is armed with AIM-120 missiles that can shoot down air targets at a distance of 74 miles and fly at supersonic speeds of almost 1,864 miles per hour. Enemy aircraft have no way to evade this. But it's not just the missiles. Ukrainian pilots are also skilled guys, as they have been training on the F-16 for more than 6 months and have demonstrated excellent results under incredible pressure. It's worth mentioning one of the most discussed events when a Ukrainian woman pilot conducted test flights on the F-16, whose skills impressed even Western experts. This gives us confidence that the skies over Ukraine will be reliably protected. In general, it's worthwhile to understand in more detail the importance of the F-16 on the battlefield. Perhaps it would have been better to send a pair of F-35s to help instead of the awesome but old Fighting Falcons. Why are F-16 fighters so important in Ukraine now? Just think about it. While Ukraine had only old MiGs, such a powerful replenishment as the F-16 radically changed the situation. This fighter played the role of an advanced fighter as it's capable of destroying both enemy aircraft and ground equipment. The F-16 Fighting Falcon is a truly powerful weapon that can turn the tide of the war. Besides, it's the main enemy of the Russian MiGs. The flight speed of the F-16 is 1,490 miles per hour with a range of 2,600 miles. It can fly the entire width of Ukraine 3 times in 2 hours. The MiG-31, on the other hand, has about the same speed but a 3 times shorter range. And this is a disaster for the Russian side. A simple example is that MiGs will not be able to catch up with Ukrainian fighters, but F-16s will easily catch up with Russians, only due to the difference in fuel. Now let's imagine a theoretical air battle between an F-16 and a MiG-31. The Russian aircraft is a heavy interceptor designed to destroy targets at high altitudes and long distances. It's equipped with powerful long-range missiles. However, its main drawback is its lower maneuverability compared to the F-16. The F-16, on the other hand, stands out for its high maneuverability and ability to perform complex acrobatic maneuvers. In short-range combat, the F-16 has a significant advantage due to its mobility and modern guidance systems. It can use short-range missiles and also fire at ground targets, for example, to get rid of air defense systems covering the MiGs.
We were really building a fighter for the 21st century that could take on all of the advanced threats that...
Of course, in a real battle, when an F-16 and MiG-31 meet face-to-face, the outcome of the battle will depend on a whole bunch of factors, whether it's the technical condition of the aircraft or even the physical performance of the pilot, but one way or another, the F-16 has a big advantage. The MiG-31 could try to destroy the F-16 at a long range using its long-range missiles. However, if the F-16 manages to get close and engage in a short-range fight, its maneuverability and modern weapons will give it a significant advantage. As for the replacement of the F-16 with the F-35, there's no need for this. In many ways, the older aircraft gives the younger Lightning II a run for its money, as it flies 310 miles per hour faster and almost twice as far. Their armament is almost identical, and their electronics are on par. No wonder the F-16 is considered the best fighter of the 4th+ generation.
These are very good aircraft.
It's quite interesting to observe not only the combat operations in which the F-16 is involved, but also the discussions of other countries, the attention of which is focused on this event. The United States and NATO allies have supported the deployment of F-16s to Ukraine from the very beginning. It demonstrated their determination to help Ukraine defend its sovereignty. The delivery of these fighters was seen as an important step in strengthening the defense capabilities of Ukraine. Of course, you and I clearly understand that NATO countries perceive this as a strengthening of their positions in Eastern Europe, but the main thing is that they support the deployment of F-16s in Ukraine. Likewise, the European Union has approved the arrival of F-16s in Ukraine. Some EU member states, especially those bordering Russia or with historical ties to Ukraine, saw this as a positive step. The Russian reaction to the deployment of F-16s in Ukraine was predictably negative. Russian officials called it a provocation and said it would increase tensions in the region. Moscow sees the F-16s as a threat to its influence in Eastern Europe and promises to take retaliatory measures. Moreover, the Russian press has launched a campaign aimed at discrediting these steps, but who cares what they think? In turn, China, which has traditionally taken a more neutral stance in European conflicts, has expressed concern about a possible escalation. Beijing is calling for diplomatic solutions and dialogue between the parties to the conflict. However, given its economic partnership with Russia, China is carefully balancing calls for peace with support for Russian sovereignty. In general, they try to please everyone. Many other countries around the world are also closely following the events. The countries of the Middle East, South America, and Africa are assessing the deployment of F-16s in Ukraine from the perspective of their political and economic interests. Some see this as an opportunity to strengthen ties with the West, while others fear that the war could escalate into a larger confrontation that could affect global stability. Based on everything we've seen, it'd be appropriate to summarize the results of the deployment of new fighter jets in Ukraine. The F-16s are now at the very center of the conflict, and their future remains uncertain. This is important because the decisions made by the governments in the coming days will determine the further course of events. Nevertheless, the delivery of F-16s to Ukraine demonstrated the determination of the United States and NATO to support Ukrainian sovereignty. These fighters significantly strengthened the country's defense capabilities and became an important symbol of international solidarity. We should also mention that a few months before the arrival of the F-16, Ukrainian pilots underwent intensive training in the United States, mastering the fighter's controls and preparing for possible air battles. The training increased the combat capability of the Ukrainian Air Force and demonstrated the Allies' willingness to provide long-term support to Ukraine. The pilots themselves expressed their admiration.
I liked the F-16. It was a great airplane to fly, but I really liked the diversity of missions that it had. It gave me a lot of opportunity to train and fly in both an air-to-air and an air-to-ground role.
Russia, for its part, perceived the arrival of F-16s in Ukraine as a serious threat and is clearly expressing its concern. As for other countries, their reactions to the F-16 deployment range from support to condemnation. The U.S. and NATO allies have welcomed the decision, while China and other countries are calling for diplomatic solutions. Together with the donation of fighter jets from other NATO allies, Ukraine should have received dozens of F-16s at the end of 2023 and even more in 2024. But at the time, the West refrained from supplying aircraft for two reasons. First, there were potential concerns that Russia would view the transfer as a serious escalation that would lead to retaliation against the United States. And second, there were some U.S. officials that believed learning to fly and logistically support the technologically advanced F-16 might be more difficult and time-consuming than it was actually worth. The first thing you need to know is how the Ukrainian Air Force has fared so far in the war with what they've had. As a former Soviet state, the Ukrainian Air Force inherited many Russian-made aircraft when it gained independence in 1991. For decades, the main fighters were old versions of MiG-29 and Su-27 aircraft. According to rough estimates, Ukraine had about 50 MiG-29 fighters and 24 Su-27s, which is not much compared to the Russian tactical aircraft of 900. However, the supposed Russian air superiority was never achieved. Ukrainian air defense systems and fighters have forced the Russian aerospace forces to be more cautious in their air missions. This allowed Ukrainian pilots to use hit-and-run tactics to punish any Russian aircraft that went too far before retreating back behind the air defense system. It wasn't all good news for Ukraine, though, and their air force suffered heavy losses in the first phase of the invasion. Ukraine lost 62 aircraft in 2022. Thanks to new tactics and a more conservative approach, these losses were reduced to 7 aircraft in 2023. If you look at the capabilities of the former Soviet MiG-29 and Su-27 fighters on paper, you'll find a lot in common with the F-16. 2 Soviet fighters were designed with a greater emphasis on air superiority. Therefore, they're actually faster and more maneuverable than the F-16. All 3 aircraft have a turnover load of about 9G. The F-16 is more of a multi-role platform for ground and air missions. It's like a Swiss Army knife of planes. This is a small performance gap, although the F-16 is about 170 miles per hour slower than Soviet jets, depending on the version. So if the F-16 is not radically better than what Ukraine already has in terms of performance, why have Ukrainian pilots been asking to fly these aircraft for years? The reality is that Ukrainian MiG-29s and Su-27s are much older versions than the same aircraft used by Russia. The Ukrainian versions of MiGs and Sukhoi are stuck in the past with inferior radar and weapons than those that Russia has on its modern versions. The Ukrainian MiG-29 can only detect aircraft at a distance of about 50 miles, while more modern Russian radars can track targets up to 100 miles away, including small radar tracks such as cruise missiles and certain drones. This way, Russia not only sees Ukrainian pilots from a greater distance, but can also shoot them first. The latest R-77 missiles can hit targets over 70 miles away, while Ukraine has nothing with that range or the ability to shoot and forget. So switching to the F-16 will completely change this equation with not only better radar sensors and electronic warfare capabilities, but also full access to the entire modern lineup of NATO armament. I didn't specify the exact range of the radar because it varies greatly depending on the specific version of the F-16 that Ukraine will receive. Among the weapons that the F-16 brings is the legendary AIM-120 AMRAAM used by the U.S. and allies since 1991. The AMRAAM has a reputation for being an extremely deadly missile, giving Ukraine the ability to reach out over 65 miles along with fire and forget capability. Russian pilots have had a huge advantage over Ukrainian Air Force until now thanks to their active radar missiles, so giving Ukraine the F-16 and a steady supply of the AMRAAM puts Ukraine on much more equal footing. Another thing you have to remember is that the F-16 is going to have an expected lifespan of between 3,500 and 4,500 flight hours, while Soviet aircraft have only 2,000 to 3,500. So the F-16 is going to be a huge advantage there. But what was holding the West back for so long, preventing them from sending the F-16? Well, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that sending F-16s to Ukraine would be seen as a nuclear threat. But this is the same strategy that Russia has employed for years now, drawing supposed nuclear red lines in the sand for any action by the West that opposes their interests, not just in Ukraine, but all over the world. So I think the leaders of the United States and Europe are tired of nuclear blackmail. In fact, there's already experience of transferring disputed weapons. A perfect example of this is the AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missile, which targets and destroys enemy radar systems to blind the enemy and neutralize their longest-range surface-to-missile batteries. The U.S. donated these HARM systems to Ukraine around July of 2022. They had an immediate impact on Russian air search and defense systems. When installed on a modern Western aircraft such as the F-16, the HARM can connect to the aircraft's more powerful radars and sensor systems to increase the detection range, allowing the pilot to fire the missile more accurately and with a much lower chance of return fire. Still, there are some concerns about adapting to the new aircraft, and Ukrainian pilots are excited about the modern digital cockpit of the F-16. Former Soviet MiGs and Su-27s have these old analog instrument clusters with dials and gauges with very few digital displays. In contrast, the F-16 uses multi-function displays to show all the most important information in the user interface, with analog dials used as a backup for less important tasks. Digital cockpits display information better and can customize the pilot's needs by quickly switching modes in an intuitive way. This reduces the burden on the pilot's attention, and the pilot's attention is a resource that's as valuable as the aircraft itself. But learning how to fly a Western aircraft with a completely different design language from Soviet aircraft meant that even skilled pilots needed months of training to be ready for combat. The F-16 itself is also very different from Soviet aircraft. The MiG-29 and Su-27 have been in service in Ukraine for a long time thanks to the additional strength that allows them to take off from civilian airfields, highways, and ordinary roads, meaning Russians have had a hard time finding and striking the aircraft on the ground since they're always shuffling to new positions. But the F-16 is far more sensitive to airfield conditions, requiring pristine chef's kiss, the perfect runways, and a lot of maintenance to keep its advanced systems functional. This limits the number of F-16 locations in Ukraine, which reduces the effective combat range of the fighters. Ukraine's been working to improve its air bases to prepare for Western jets for this reason. But the difficulties are not only in pilots and air bases, but also in aircraft maintenance. According to a Government Accountability Office report, maintenance personnel in the United States Air Force require between 23 and 133 days of training just to reach the apprentice level. A small number of trained ground crews to maintain the fighters is almost as bad as not getting new fighters at all. The cost factor should also be considered. Every AMRAAM fired costs $1.8 million per missile to produce. Western leaders have publicly commented and recommended that these costs for Ukraine be maintained as long as necessary to force Russia to back down. But the Russian strategy for continuing the war, despite the lack of progress, seems to be based on the idea that Western support is running out. But in reality, most of the military assistance coming to Ukraine is surplus equipment that the US and other NATO countries were going to get rid of anyway. In the case of the F-16, Western countries have transferred their fighters to Ukraine as they're replacing old fighters with new F-35s anyway. In any case, the assistance saves money for some of these countries by eliminating the difficulties associated with decommissioning aircraft. Yes, believe it or not, decommissioning old equipment is expensive. Even if there's a long wait for the F-16 before Ukraine can fly full squadrons, starting this process now ensures that Ukraine will have access to hundreds of F-16s in the future. Even if the F-16s don't shoot down enemy aircraft for months, the mere fact that they're flying may force Russia to make a difficult choice between keeping the old airframes and preventing competition in the skies over Ukraine. What do you think? Write your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to watch our other videos on military technology to stay up to date. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more interesting details. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.